Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm Paige, I'm an alcoholic. And yeah, we decided to start recording this just because there's some people in the United Kingdom and in different parts of the world where it was kind of tough to make the study, and they were asking, you know, hey, is it possible that you record it? So that's kind of why we decided to put on the recording. Also, I guess because it's going to be recorded, and Steve will probably toss it on YouTube. If you have any questions, maybe the best thing to do for question is to just toss them in the chat, or stick around after, and I will answer questions about the big book like all day, every day. That is my jam. So we could do it like that. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to pick up where we left off last week, which will be the foreword to the third edition, which for the purposes of recording is completely a natural starting place for a big book study. It's not, I'm just being a little ridiculous. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pick up and we're going to just crush them. Foreword to the third edition, foreword to the fourth edition. And hopefully what we'll do today is get into I think we can get into the doctor's opinion. And as we kind of go through this work, what we'll do is we'll end up doing a lot of review of some of the stuff we did last week. So if you're just joining today or just picked it up on the recording, yeah, you'll be all caught up ideally and hopefully. So foreword to the third edition, it starts on page XXII. And the foreword to the third edition, I have always a fun fact for things like forewords. And my fun fact that is not fun, but it is a fact. The foreword to the third edition is the first foreword that was not pen to paper by Bill Wilson. And why that fact is not fun, it is because he passed away in 71 and it was written in 76. So it's just a fact, not a lot of fun there. All right. So again, foreword to the third edition, XXII, Roman numerals. Foreword to the third edition. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. And what we spoke about last week when we were in the preface was like, what's changed in the book and what hasn't. And what's changed in the book is the stories. The stories have changed, and the purpose of the stories changing is, the purpose of the stories changing is so that more and more alcoholics could relate, and more alcoholics of a wide variety of backgrounds and origins and locations and gender and race and age could say, yes, that's me. I have this thing, and yes, that's me. I need this solution. And so what has not changed in the book since it was first written is essentially the first 164 pages. The descriptions and the directions on how to get well and stay well. And that is part of why we go and why I like going line by line through this book, because those directions have not changed. And keep in mind, we're a bunch of sober alcoholics, big book compendium, maybe some addicts too, right? Hey, welcome. We make changes. We like to change things. I think we've all had that phase where we come to AA and we want to tell everybody how it should change and how they're doing it wrong and how we've got these great ideas, right? So despite the fact that we all go through that phase, it has not changed. So it says women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. That's 1976. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of AA surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. The problem with getting sober young is when you're young and you read less than 30 years of age, that seems like, oh, that's me, I'm less than 30. And then you stay sober and time passes and then you pass 30 and now you're like the youths. They are the youths. So sometimes I just feel old as I go through this thing. I know I'm not old. So the basic principles. And the principles that we're describing, whenever we hear about these spiritual principles, the principles are very simply the 12 steps. So the basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. And as we get into the chapter, there's a solution. What we're going to see is that if it is spiritual truth, it is spiritual truth. So it applies regardless of my religion, regardless of where I live in the world. If there is truth in it, and there is truth. And I think that's why this program works for all of us, because it is spiritual truth. So the 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Los 12 Pasos in one country and Les 12 Étapes in another. But they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. In spite of the great increase in the size and span of this fellowship, at its core, it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And that is what I am called to share. When I sit down with another alcoholic, when I sit down with a sponsee, when I come to a meeting, that is what I am called to share. Of course, it is my experience with alcoholism, but I also want to have experience with the program of recovery and the strength and hope that is truly not my own, the strength and hope that comes from the God of my own understanding. So forward to the third edition, check, check. Off to forward to the fourth edition. And one of the things I love about the forward to the fourth edition is I had a forward to the fourth edition moment through the forward to the fourth edition. You probably don't know what the heck I'm talking about right now, but as we read through, I'll explain it. So this fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off the press in November 2001 at the start of a new millennium. Since the third edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth. And a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century, that's 25 years, has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous, again, that is the title of this book. And we are named, Alcoholics Anonymous is named after this book, not the other way around. But Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. And one of my favorite things to do when I'm working with sponsees, because, you know, if we're starting at this point in the book, I love asking this question. If there's anywhere in the world, where would you want to travel? Where would you want to go? And some people it's Hawaii, some it's Australia, sometimes it's Southeast Asia, maybe it's somewhere in Europe. And so imagine that I'm traveling, and like imagine what that place is for you, that place that you would want to go anywhere in the world. And imagine that you were traveling there as a sober, as a recovered alcoholic or a recovered addict. And you're going to be there for a long time. It's like a real nice vacation. You know what I mean? It's not popping there for a weekend or going there for a week or two. You're going to be there for months and months and months. And in order to stay sober, what I learn is that I have to work with another alcoholic. I have to carry this message. So I go to this country where I don't know anyone, but in order for me to stay sober, I've got to work with others. Welcome, I'm glad you're here. And so what I do, and what I would do is I would sit and I would carry the message little by little. I would find maybe another English speaking alcoholic, and I would sit with them and we would do the steps. And we'd start to get well, and little by little, that seed gets planted, and we're maybe having 4 or 5, and there's a meeting, and they're starting to work with others. And maybe some of the people that I work with who are bilingual are starting to carry the message to non-English speaking alcoholics. But then, when this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, comes to that country in a language that they can read and understand, that's when this thing explodes. and it takes off like a rocket. And what that tells me again is the importance of this book. When these clear-cut directions are in a language that I can read and understand, people get well. And so it says, as the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men. And it says a few women, but it was one. It was like one, it was one woman. And my joke that I made last week was part of the reason why the stories changed is because if we kept the stories from 1939, it would be a bunch of middle-aged white dudes named Bill and Bob and William and Robert and then a couple Richards. And then that's my dickhead joke for the big book study. Anywho. So it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, what this tells us is that this is a textbook. And what a textbook is a book that I learn from, that I study from. And so imagine if this book was a chemistry book, right? If I was learning chemistry, and again, I might not be super excited to learn chemistry. I might not be super excited to dive into that. But in a chemistry book, it's going to give me a number of experiments that I can run. And it's going to give me precise directions on how to conduct that experiment. You mix this with this and this amount of this, and you let it sit for this specific amount of time. And so I want to follow those directions precisely. And so that's exactly what this book is. It's going to give me precise directions on how to get the result. It is also going to give me the diagnostic criteria for alcoholism, to know and understand if I have this thing and if I have to do this work. So it says, like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could ever have imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. And so what it's saying in that paragraph is that line, where people who normally would not mix, goodness, that became so prophetic. That became a vision of the hope. And so when I said I had a forward to the fourth edition experience with the forward to the fourth edition, what I mean is I have found this next paragraph to have really become a vision for hope of what's happened here in AA or here in a variety of 12-step fellowships. So it says, while our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, again, that is the point of this book, to preserve the integrity of the message, so that the message does not get lost in that proverbial telephone game. Sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. It's happening. It's happening right now. We're doing it. And when in 2001, when the fourth edition of the book was published, it didn't look like what it looked like now. And I remember the sort of pre-pandemic era, and I would read responses as part of the book. I'd be like, I mean, and I would kind of talk down the value of online meetings, because I had tried some online meetings pre-COVID, and the ones that I had tried were a lot of those text-based chat room meetings. And from them, I didn't get a lot. And I really, as somebody with a disability, I had a passion for making Alcoholics Anonymous, making these directions, these steps more accessible. And then when COVID hit, we all moved online. I was like, ooh, like a Zoom meeting? Ooh, that's going to be weird. and awkward and uncomfortable. And I was right. For 30 seconds it was. And that's just for me, this is just my experience. It's been great. I love it. I've had so much fun. I've had wonderful experiences. And so I just love that this Forward to the Fourth edition has become, who would have guessed, who would have thought, right? So, so taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. In any meeting, anywhere, AA share experience, strength, and hope with each other. Hey, that's what we said in the third edition, right? That is what I meant to bring. My experience, of course, with the disease of alcoholism, but also with the program of action and the solution, and the strength and hope that I get from the God of my understanding. So we share that with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Man, we haven't even popped into the doctor's opinion yet, but it tells me I got to help other alcoholics if I'm going to stay sober. Working with others is a thing I have to do, whether I like it or not. So modem to modem or face to face, AAs speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. All right, so I was just checking the chat, see if there was any question. Let's pop over to the doctor's opinion. So the doctor's opinion, XXV, and the doctor's opinion, just to kind of describe what we're going to be reading or what we're going to be getting into. The doctor's opinion really begins to give us the diagnostic criteria for alcoholism. So it starts to give us the very basic information that I need to know in order to determine whether or not I have alcoholism. So it's going to begin to lay down the foundation that I need for step one. And the doctor's opinion is essentially 2 letters written by Dr. William D. Silkworth. And we're going to see who this guy is, and we're going to see why we care about his opinion. All right, so the doctor's opinion. It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. I don't know about you, and I know there are some people that absolutely came here and was like, yes, I care what doctors think about Alcoholics Anonymous. That was not my experience. I did not care. I'm like, I don't care what they think. I might have shown up with some doctor resentment that I had to let go of and work through and possibly amend. 4-step inventory, absolutely vital. So it says, convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the suffering of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor. So this is Dr. Silkworth, chief physician. And to be the chief physician is like the top doctor. It's the boss doctor, you know? He was like the one that was working and running the whole show at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. So that if you're writing in your book, it's Dr. Silkworth, and the nationally prominent hospital was the Towns Hospital in New York City. And this hospital, it happened to be kind of not far from Central Park, and the hospital, all like, it was not like a whole like general hospital. Its sole purpose as a hospital was to treat alcoholism and drug addiction. And so this guy, Dr. Silkworth, he is the top doctor of this hospital. And during his time working at the Towns Hospital, he worked with something like 50,000 different alcoholics and different drug addicts. And so that's why we care what his opinion is. I always like to make the joke, he's not a dermatologist that saw his aunt get a little too tipsy, you know, a couple times. He is a gentleman that worked with us time and time again. And the conclusion that he came to about what alcoholism is was based off his experience. And so he gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. So, to whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. So again, we see that appeal to authority. We see that, okay, this is a guy, he is specialized in alcoholism. That is his focus. That is his focus of study, his focus of work. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. Now, as we go through this book and as we go through this work, one of the things I always want to emphasize is hopeless. Because as we go through, we will see what does it mean to be an alcoholic. And to be an alcoholic is to suffer from a hopeless condition of mind and body. And so if you're wondering who that competent businessman is, it's Bill Wilson, Bill W. And what I'll do is I'll share the screen, and I'll share that picture that I showed with you guys last week to kind of tie it all together. So I'll pop that up, and hopefully that works out. All right, so if we look at the bottom there, what we see is Dr. Silkworth. And last week I was trying to use like sex appeal to sell you on some of the history. And he might not have been the most attractive fella, but he sure knew alcoholics, and he sure knew what was wrong with us. And so Bill Wilson, it says in the book, it says, as part of, in the course of his third treatment. So Bill Wilson, our co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he goes, and we can see it on page 7, where he goes to the town's hospital because of his alcoholism. And he works one-on-one with Dr. Silkworth, and Dr. Silkworth tells him that he's got this physical allergy. He has this thing that once he starts to drink, he's compelled to take more, and the more that he drinks, the more that he's compelled to take that next drink, that he cannot control the amount he takes once he starts to drink. And Bill is like, yeah, that's me. I have that. And Dr. Silkworth says, and there's this thing that alcoholics have when it comes to combating liquor, when it comes to trying to stay away from that first drink, that there is no willpower. They have this thing called the mental obsession. They have this insane thought that says, no, this time will be different. This time I can drink again. This time nobody will know. And Bill Wilson is like, yes, that's me. I have that. That's me. I'm an alcoholic. All right, I got self-knowledge. No way I'm going to drink again. So he leaves rehab and he gets drunk. The mental obsession kicks in. He gets drunk, and a year later, he goes back to the hospital. And he worked with Dr. Silkworth, and the story goes, he's sitting in his hospital bed, and actually we can see it at the very bottom of page 7, where it talks about how Bill Wilson, his wife, was talking with Dr. Silkworth, and Dr. Silkworth told his wife, listen, Lois, you're going to have to start making funeral arrangements, or see if you can get him put into an asylum, because Bill Wilson is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. I don't have anything that I can do for him. I don't have a solution that I have. There's nothing I can do for him. He is going to die from this disease. And Bill Wilson overhears this, and he learns the grave nature of alcoholism. And he's afraid, and he's scared, and he does not want to drink again, and he drinks again. And he's off on his bender. And his friend, and if we go from the star and Bill, if we look right up, we see his friend Ebby Thatcher. And it says, in the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. And his friend Ebby Thatcher shows up with knowledge. So Bill, in that moment, he's drinking, and he knows what his problem is. He has an understanding of what alcoholism is, and that does not keep him sober. Ebby Thatcher shows up with a solution, and in Alcoholics Anonymous, our solution is a spiritual awakening, and he shows up with a program of action, a way in which we can have a spiritual awakening. And that's the 12 steps, and how that happened, just to kind of go over the history again, to review it, and for the recording, for those who are hearing it for the first time. The story starts with Roland Hazard on page 26. He's this incredibly rich guy. He comes from a super, super rich family, and he's got alcoholism. I always make the joke with Sponsees. I'm like, he was so rich that when the Great Depression hit, his family had to sell some of their yachts, but not all of their yachts. You know what I mean? He's rich. His name is Roland Hazard III. So if you got the third, you're rich. And but he also has alcoholism. and he's not able to stay sober. And he tries everything in the United States that he can think of. He tries the best known psychiatrists, the best known doctors. He tries the best rehabs in the United States. Now, of course, they weren't called rehabs then. They were called things like asylums, institutions. And he can't stay sober. And he says, that's it. I'm going to go to the best of the best in the entire world. I am going to see, well, he wanted to see Sigmund Freud, but had to settle for Carl Jung. And thank God for that, because Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, they differed in a whole number of different areas. But their main point of difference for our purposes was Carl Jung believed there were certain conditions that required spirituality. And he believed and knew about the power of a spiritual awakening, the power of a spiritual experience. So Roland Hazard, he goes and he's working with Carl Jung, and he works intently, intensively, one-on-one. He's all the way in Switzerland working with this guy for a whole year, and he knows himself. He knows himself so well. He's worked through his trauma. He's understood his triggers. He knows his motivations. He's worked through all his childhood stuff, his family stuff. He's in a good place. And he leaves and he drinks again. And he goes back to Carl Jung. And he's like, dude, what? And Carl Jung has the humility to say, I was wrong. I misdiagnosed you. You are an alcoholic. And I haven't seen anyone recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you. And Roland Hazard feels hopeless. He does not know what is wrong with him. Or, well, he doesn't, he feels hopeless. He doesn't know how he's going to be able to stay sober. And he says, is there not any exception? And Carl Jung says, yes, the exception for cases such as yours is a vital spiritual experience, a life-giving spiritual experience. And that is the exception. So Roland Hazard's like, okay, it's spiritual awakening. I can have one of those. And he says, listen, I go to church. Am I going to get it there? And Carl Jung says, no, the odds of this thing happening to you are the odds of you getting struck by lightning. You've got to go out and find it and seek it. And so Roland Hazard, he knows he has to have a spiritual awakening. Now, on page 26, it gives probably one of the best, at least one of my favorite descriptions of what a spiritual awakening is. And it discusses how the ideas, the motivations, the attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of our lives, are suddenly cast to one side. And a new set of ideas, motives, and actions and vision for the world begins to dominate. The way in which we operate and see the world becomes completely different. And he's got to have it, and he doesn't know where to go. And what was growing in popularity at that time was something called the Oxford Group. Now, the Oxford Group or the Oxford movement had nothing to do with alcoholism. They had everything to do with having a deep and profound experience of the God of their own understanding. And Roland's like, I need that. So with the knowledge of what his solution is, a spiritual awakening, he goes to the Oxford Group, and they had some tenets, some principles, which later became our program of action, the 12 steps. He works those steps, he has the experience, and he stays sober. He then carries that message to Ebby Thacher. And Ebby Thacher works those steps, and he has an experience, and he stays sober. And Ebby Thacher, in between Bill Wilson's relapse, before he goes to the Towns Hospital for the third time, Ebby Thacher shows up and says, listen. And Ebby Thacher, he's 2 months sober. He's got this light in his eyes. And I just want to emphasize that 2 months sober, because I'm a big believer. It does not take long to get well. It does not take long to do this work. It does not take long to have this experience. But he's 2 months sober, and he shows up to Bill and he says, listen, I have this experience. I have a solution, and I have a program of action, right? And that's when it says, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. Bill Wilson already having knowledge of what our problem is. And so that's how that comes together. And so if you're writing in your book, you don't have to, but if you are, that's great. Feel free to make a note of those 3 pieces of information. Our problem, which is a physical allergy, and a mental obsession, which is fueled by that spiritual malady. We have a solution, which is a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, getting connected with the God of your understanding. And we have a program of action. We have a way in which we can go from the hopelessness of my problem to the hope of my solution. And for our purposes, that is very simply the 12 steps. So that was a long breakdown of that one paragraph, but I wanted to make sure we did review for everyone. So back to XXV. It says, as part of his rehabilitation, so we're talking about Bill, as part of his rehabilitation, as part of his staying well, getting well and staying well, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. What we're talking about there is 12-step work. So what he's saying is, like, we haven't even described in any sort of detail what my problem is. But we're telling me if I want to get well and I want to stay well, I've got to work with others. That's not an optional, extra special gold star part of this deal. This is a minimum requirement. I have to work with others. And if we haven't, I don't mean that in a shaming way or anything like that. Let us help you have that experience, because that is where this thing takes on new meaning. And life gets incredible when I do that. So it says this one alcoholic working with another. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man, Bill Wilson, and over 100 others appear to have recovered. Now we spoke about recovered a whole lot last week, and recovered is the hope. Recovered does not mean cured, and we're going to see that recovered does not mean cured when we get to the 10th step. But recovered, what that means is that I have had that experience and the mental obsession has been removed. I no longer have that insane thought that tells me I can drink again. This time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I'll go out for 3 drinks, or I'll go out for 3 days and get back on it on Monday, right? So it says, I personally know scores of cases who are of the type with whom other methods have failed completely. Now, when I'm working with sponsees and we go through this part of the book, I ask these questions. So if I am not sure whether or not I am of an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, I can ask myself, is my experience that I have tried other methods and other avenues of recovery? And is my experience that they have not worked? And so, to be transparent with you guys, I have not tried everything, but my experience is everything that I tried failed. I could not stay sober, or I could not stay sober for long. And those periods of sobriety were so painful and so awful that I wanted to kill myself. And nothing, and I tried a lot of stuff. I didn't try everything, but I tried a lot of stuff. None of it worked. And so that tells me that I might be an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. And by the way, we're going to emphasize hopeless a whole bunch, but if I am hopeless and an alcoholic, that's a really good thing, because here's my experience. Only when I'm hopeless am I willing to grab onto the hope that is on offer in this thing. Only when I have come to the end of myself am I willing to do an inventory. Am I willing to do a 5th step? Am I willing to make amends? Am I willing to pray and to meditate and to work with others? It's only when I'm hopeless that I can really grab on to that hope that we have. So it says, these facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth. Inherent in this group, they may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. I have to read that very carefully every single time. But when it says rapid growth, again, what that tells me is it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to have a spiritual experience. And when it says these men may mark a new epoch, an epoch is an age or an era of time, and an annal, saying it very carefully, an annal is recorded history. So what it's saying is this is a new era of recorded history. But I really like metaphors. Like, I love metaphors and visualizations. And so the one that I use for this is, if you've ever seen God, I hope so. If you've ever seen Beauty and the Beast, I don't care if it's the one from the 90s, the animated one, or the Emma Watson one, or whatever it was. If I've ever seen Beauty and the Beast, and I see that library, that Beast's library, and just imagine any like beautiful library. Imagine in that library, every single book is about alcoholism. Every single book, every single one is about alcoholism. And on every page and in every book, what it says is that alcoholics are hopeless. Alcoholics are doomed to die. Alcoholics, hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. And what Dr. Silkworth is saying is that there's a new book with a new page that says there might be hope for alcoholics. That's what he's saying. And I just like the visual. And it says, these men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. Now, it says you may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. One of the things that I can see, like I've heard it described as, hey, that's a benchmark line. Like, if he were alive, would he say this about me? But the truth is, he is saying this about me. Dr. Silkworth has been long dead, but what he is saying is that you can rely absolutely on anything that Paige says about herself. And I can look and I can see, am I living up to that standard? Am I honoring that legacy that Dr. Silkworth left for me? And again, when I say these things, like I've got to work with others, or I say these things, is that my experience? I don't mean it in a shaming way. I can ask for help and I can let the God of my understanding take me to those ideals. So, and in the first edition, it didn't say very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. It said XXMD. And so William Silkworth, basically, he wanted to be anonymous. And the reason he wanted to be anonymous was he was really going out on a limb. We have to realize that when this letter was written, it was 37. I think the first one was written, and 38 was when the second one was written. The idea that alcoholism was a disease was new information, right? And it was kind of revolutionary information. It was not something that was widely accepted. You're telling me that alcoholism is a disease? No. They're just weak-willed, and they're just immoral, and they're just a bad character, and they're just a bunch of bad apples, those drunks. I'm using the old-timey language, right? But to go out and say that it is a disease, that was new, and that was brave. And then we're going to see in the second letter that not only is he going to say that, he's going to say that the solution for this disease, he's going to agree with us and say it's spirituality. Man, he's going out on quite the limb. And so in that first edition, he wanted to stay anonymous. Now, by the time the print into the second edition, he's like, you can throw my name in there. Woo! Throw my name in there, because there's alcoholics getting well, staying well. There was more scientific backing around what alcoholism was. And so, yeah, throw my name in there. But also, a lot of people wonder, how come the doctor's opinion is so important for step one? Why does it start in the Roman numerals? Nobody reads Roman numerals. Paige does, because she's weird, but nobody else, right? Why is it on page one? And the reason is because if there's any contribution to a book that starts on the numbered pages, you are considered an author of that book. So the doctor's opinion is in the Roman numerals because he wasn't meant to be an author of the book. And so, and the author, it's like anonymous, so it's not meant to have a specific author. So that's why. So it's just, if anyone's just a fun fact, and when you're at your next meeting, you can, and in and around the doctor's opinion, you can do the well actually. So I'm here for the well actuallys and the fun facts. So now is when the alcoholics interject. And I always want to make the joke. I don't want to make the joke. I do it anyways. I always make the joke that the alcoholics interject because that's what we do. We can't just let the doctor have the last word. We always got to throw in our 2 cents. But the truth is we have to tie the two letters together. So that's what's going on there. So we're tying the two letters together. So it says, the physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. And this is where we really begin to get into the physical allergy. He says, in this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind, that there is something physiologically different about who I am, about the way in which I process alcohol, that there is something physically different about my reaction when I take alcohol that doesn't happen to non-alcoholics. And it says, it did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking. Now, again, every time it talks about control, we're talking about the allergy. Lack of control is the allergy. And just to tie it in again, lack of choice is the mental obsession. So that we could not control physical allergy. We could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we're in full flight from reality, or we're outright mental defectives, sometimes me. And actually, I know there's a meeting called Outright Mental Defectives, which I think is a delightful name for a meeting. And it says these things were true to some extent. In fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, maybe me, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. So for our purpose, when we talk about an allergy, what we're simply talking about is an abnormal physical reaction. So a reaction that happens on a physical level that does not happen to the majority of the population, right? So that most people do not have this reaction, and this reaction happens on a physical level. And it says, as laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little. What's that saying? That saying is drunk, so I'm not a doctor. I know that we have some people here who might be doctors or learning how to be doctors, but for most of us, we're not doctors. I also make the joke that I have written my own prescription a time or two. You know, I'll take a pill or several of those and a drinky drink of that, and that'll fix that problem. Yeah. So I have written my own prescriptions, but I am not a doctor, and say we're not scientists, except for those that are. We're not scientists, right? So our saying, yes, we have a physical allergy, that may not carry weight, especially for those who care what doctors think, right? In this chapter, right? So it says, as laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. And when you heard about the physical allergy for the first time, or maybe you're hearing about it for the first time right now, right? Hopefully not. But if you are, that idea that once I start to drink, there's something inside of me that tells me I need more. And the more that I drink, the more that I have to drink, you're like, yeah. I know for me, I was like, that makes sense. That's why I couldn't stop at one or two. That's why when I said, I'm going to go out and I'll have no more than two, and I meant it, I couldn't. I have a propensity for always overshooting the mark. I almost always overdrink. And when somebody described to me the allergy, I was like, that is me. That is what happens to me. That makes sense. Oh, you must have heard me. I was talking about doctors. Welcome. All right. We're doctor's opinion XXVI. And so it says, though we work our solution on the spiritual as well as altruistic plane. So our solution is spiritual. Our solution is a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. And what is altruism? Altruism is that doing the right thing with no strings attached. What are we alluding to? We're alluding to 12-step work. Man, that's annoying. Really, we haven't really dove into the meat and potatoes of the allergy. We just said that you have one. We just described, it's just an abnormal physical reaction, but I gotta work with others? Man, sounds like next time you're gonna tell me that this is gonna be a way of life and that I just can't be done with it and I gotta keep doing it the rest of my life. Yes, we will get there. Yeah. All right. And so, though we work our solution on the spiritual as well as altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. What it's saying is there are times alcoholics need detox. It says more often than not, it is imperative. Imperative is of the utmost importance that a man's brain be cleared before he's approached. Has he then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer? So it's talking about basically for me to show up and to carry this message, it's the most effective if they're fully detoxed off of alcohol. But that is also a line when I work with sponsees. What I ask for my sponsees is that complete abstinence, so that we're not, smoking crack like a gentleman or whatever. Yeah. The complete abstinence. And that's a line that I use to refer to for that like, hey, I can't be under the influence of that which brings that mind altering state of mind, right? Or be under the influence of that which triggers the allergy for me. So that's where a line that I use to talk about that with sponsees. So now we're getting back into the second letter, and it says, the doctor writes, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. Paramount is of the utmost, it's like the top of the mountain. So this is saying this is the most of the subject. What we're talking about in this book is of the most importance for those who might be suffering from alcoholism. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. So again, Dr. Silkworth is here saying, hey, I'm an expert. I've worked for many years at the Towns Hospital in New York City, and I've seen the hundreds and thousands of alcoholics come and come and come and go. And so my theory, my opinion on alcoholism is based out of experience. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have, and I'm going to read this how I imagined it was worded with the tone and the inflection. So I'm going to read it weird on purpose is what I'm saying. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. I don't know why I assume that people have weird accents. He was probably quite normal and had a quite normal accent. But I just remember like reading that paragraph and being like, what the heck are you talking about? What is moral psychology? Who cares about your ultra modern standards, dude, in the 1930s? Okay, little Miss Judgy Pants over here. What he's saying is we spoke about how he's really going on that limb, saying that alcoholism is a disease. Like he's really like, he's saying like, hey, and it's what we just spoke about, where it's like also the solution is spirituality. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to say it in a bit of an indirect way, describing the solution. So moral psychology, when I see moral psychology, what I can write or what I can think is the 12 steps to have a spiritual experience. That's what we're talking about, moral psychology. And he's saying like, hey, we felt this idea of spirituality for alcoholics, urgent importance. We felt like, hey, we got to give you guys this thing. You guys need spirituality, right? But when it talks about our ultra modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, what he's saying is like, I'm a doctor, I'm a man of science. I don't know how to write a prescription for God. It's very funny. If you've ever seen Dr. Bob's prescription, it's, you know, you can kind of see it written out. It's trust God, clean house, help others. So there is a prescription. But he's saying, like, as a doctor, I don't know how to tell you, get spiritual, get connected with God. And we're men of science. And I don't know how to offer this thing to you. And I love that it says we are not well equipped to apply the powers of good. And I love that, because for me, I don't know if that's how he wrote it or what he intended, but for me, it feels like a sneaky O, right? A little bit of a sneaky extra O. And is it possible that what we're talking about is the power of God, of our own understanding that works through us as we work these steps? So many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book, that's Bill Wilson, came under our care in this hospital. And while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. What we're talking about is the problem, the solution, and the program of action. So Bill, in his first 2 hospitalizations in the town hospital, he learned what his problem is. Again, mental obsession, physical allergy. His friend Roland Hazard brings him knowledge of what the solution is. Bill, the solution is a spiritual experience. The solution is a spiritual awakening. And the program of action, the way to have that, is the 12 steps. And I love that it says he put into practical application at once. What that means is he worked the steps, and he quickly, with some velocity, with some hustle, he did it. He worked the steps, and as the result, he had a spiritual experience. I do not think that Dr. Silkworth would say hustle, just like it's unlikely that Carl Jung said dude. But that is how I interpret their message. So later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here. And with some misgiving, we consented. So what we're talking about is 12-step work. Again, we haven't even got to the meat and potatoes of the physical allergy. We haven't spoken about the mental obsession. We have not got into the cycle of alcoholism, but we see at least 3 times where it says, I've got to work with others, because that is what Bill did. And I love that it's like, with some misgivings, we consented. What that means is like, okay, Bill, I will let you work with the real messed up ones, like the real bad cases. We're not going to give you any of the promising ones. We're gonna give you some of those real low bottom ones. See if you can help them out, right? But it says the cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. And I love that it talks about this. And this is one of those lines when I go through this book, I always want to ask, is this my experience? So when we talk about the allergy, I can say, is this my experience? But this feels like a part of the paragraph where I can ask, is this my experience? And it starts with the unselfishness, not perfectly, but it's not something I'm growing into. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them. The entire absence of profit motive. Their community spirit. That's my experience. It is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in the alcoholic field. They believe in themselves, and I love this, and still more in the capital P power. And one of the things when I see capitalizations, it can be an indication, it is a synonym for God. It is a synonym for higher power. So that is kind of what we're talking about here. They believe in themselves, and that's what it looks like to those around me. But still more, I believe in the power, capital B power, which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. It goes on to say, of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. And that often requires a definite hospital procedure. So again, he's saying, like, with alcoholics, we often recommend a detox process, that I need to be fully sober, completely abstinent before I start this process. That's what he's saying. And so it's another place when I work with sponsees, I point out, hey, for me to work with me, complete abstinence. So before, psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. And actually, what I think is we're coming right up to the hour. And I know Steve's got to go. And this is actually a really good natural stopping point, even though it might not seem like it. why don't we wrap it up there? And we'll pick up at this place next week. And I do hope you'll join me, because otherwise it'll be me alone in a Zoom room. So please come. And it's more fun with all of you. And so I'll just wrap it up, if you don't mind, with the Serenity Prayer.